This is a definitive Claude AI course for insurance agents and agencies in 2026. No more using ChatGPT, no more unnecessary manual work, and no more searching for tutorials that aren't even relevant to insurance. This course is split into 5 different stages, and we will cover everything from the most basic things and finally to the most advanced workflows. Without any further ado, let's get straight into it. So here's all of the material that we will be covering throughout the next hour or two within this course. As you'll see here, we have the 5 stages that I was talking about, each with different numbers of use cases, but all in all, we're going to be walking through 21 use cases that you can actually use Claude to automate in 2026 and even start doing that today. Now for each of the use cases, I've prepared some assets to go along with them, and that, as well as anything that we end up building, will be found inside of my resource hub for completely free using the second link in the description. And if you're wondering what the first link is, you can actually schedule a free one-on-one consultation with me and my team, and again, that's going to be the first link in the description. But with that in mind, let's dive into the first stage of using Claude Code as an insurance agent or agency and get a peek at the 5 different use cases that we have over here. So as you can see here, level 1 is a consumption phase, where we simply use the Claude website within the browser to go ahead and explore these 5 different use cases. So now with the consumption phase, pillar 1 is getting familiar with the Claude UI. So let's go ahead and do that right now. So over here, I'm inside of my Claude and I'm on the main page, as you can see here. Now the way the Claude UI works is actually pretty similar to that of ChatGPT. You have a sidebar over here that you can expand, and over here you'll see different sections. We're going to have chats, we're going to see projects, we're going to see artifacts, customization, code, cowork, and design. Now sooner or later throughout this video, we will cover every single one of these. But for now, just to get you familiar with the core features of Claude, over here you have the model selector, which is pretty straightforward. Depending on the time that you see this video, these models may change, but typically, Claude will have some combination of 3 or 4 models of different strengths, whereas models like Opus are going to be powerhouses, so pretty much carrying out the most difficult work for you, and something like Sonnet 4.6 being the model in the middle are pretty much the best choice for any typical task. Tycoon 4.5 is just a light and a very fast model. Now these models are usually going to be ranked in strength, but as you can see here, this is pretty straightforward. The models are ranked in the order of their strength. Now as for the effort of the models, the effort of a model is pretty much like the effort of a human. It's basically how hard it tries to give you a specific and accurate response. Now with something like Opus, the default is going to be set to high, because obviously it's a very advanced model, and you want the effort to be proportional to the strength of the model. Whereas with Sonnet 4.6, for example, the default is going to be low effort. Now, there's also something called thinking, which allows the models to think through whatever they're doing. Sometimes you can turn this on, but just know that it's not really about getting fancy or trying to use as many features as possible. It's also about what kind of instructions you're giving and how you're actually using Claude, because if all you're using it for is writing, then there's no point in getting fancy whatsoever. Now that we have the models covered, let's go over to settings, and then from there go ahead to capabilities. Now the capabilities section is very important because there are 2 main things that you can turn on to really make your experience much more relevant. Now the first one is going to be to search and reference chats. This is basically going to allow Claude in any new chat to look back at your past chats for more context, and it can get really powerful because if Claude already has the context of a previous situation, it can better help you in the new one. Then we also have this capability, which is generating memory from chat history, and I cannot stress how powerful this was for me, but basically every single night after you go to sleep, Claude is going to update its memory of you and essentially all the context about you, so that everything it really knows about you is always going to stay relevant and is going to be able to reference things that happened a day ago, maybe 2 days ago, and so on. And what you can also do if you've used ChatGPT in the past is store import from other AI providers. So if you have your context inside of the ChatGPT settings, or if you just want to ask ChatGPT about who you are, you can go ahead and do that, and then pretty much copy paste that information into here and click add to memory, and without even having chatted with Claude, it already knows you just as well as ChatGPT did. Now a few other cool features that Claude has are going to be the text to speech feature. So if I demo this out, right here I'm using the text to speech feature. I'm just demoing this feature out to test it for my video. You can see here that it's pretty simple. You just press and hold to record, and instead of having to type everything out, you basically just speak it. There's also something called voice mode. This might not be a fit for a lot of cases. Now for prompting, I don't have a specific framework, but I can give you an example and explain how I usually do it. So you can see here that I've quickly typed something out, and what I'm asking Claude to do is actually create a diagram for my Claude Code for Insurance course video. A simple 3-pillar, relatively small diagram in a typical color palette. I specified that this is for a prompting framework. I explained that the framework is very simple, and I explained the main ideas of this framework. So now let's go ahead, using the things we've learned, go ahead and turn on Opus to create me this diagram, and let's check out the final result. So if we take a look at our result here after I gave it this prompt, it went ahead and did some thinking, put together a file, and it went ahead and gave me this diagram file. And so now if I go ahead and I paste in whatever it gave me, inside of here, you'll see that I got a very nice 3-pillar diagram as I just asked for. And yep, this is the specified context and clarifier framework that you want to be using with Claude, because whatever we will be building in the rest of this video will build off of these principles. And so with that in mind, we have successfully covered the Claude UI, so the chats, the models, the settings, how to prompt, as well as the general idea of what features you can use and where they are located. Now we will move on to pillar 2, which is basic outputs. This involves creating presentations, Word docs, and actually diagrams like these, or the one I just had a few seconds ago, and seeing how Claude can basically extract information from files, for example, and a bunch more. So let's say I want to go back inside of Claude over here and create a new chat. What I'm going to do here is start with the plain English policy summary for client use case. Now, it's important to note because policy summaries can include things like PII as well as other information. I would recommend that for compliance purposes, you upgrade to at least the Claude team plan, or better yet, the Claude enterprise plan, so that the details are always secure. Claude isn't able to train its models based on the data you've given and so on. But over here, you'll see I attached a sample homeowners policy, and this thing is designed to be dense, so it has multiple pages filled with text. Now let's go ahead and ask it to summarize this policy. Now it's important to note that for this use case in specific, me using Opus 4.8 was actually overkill. For something like this, Sonnet would probably be enough. But over here, of course, now that we have the summary, looking at this output we have over here, it's nice that we have the details, but it doesn't look all that great visually. And Claude likely realizes that because it asks us if we want to turn it into a client-facing one-pager or a coverage gap checklist. Now here I said that I want to turn it into a nice one-pager, blue and purple color palette, HTML first, then PDF. Now the reason for HTML first and then PDF is because without getting too technical, HTML is essentially code. And because HTML is more code-based than a PDF, it logically makes sense to ask Claude to work in the code first and then convert it to the PDF. Because if we just sell it, go directly to the PDF, it might create the HTML and then create the PDF, but subtle things like telling it to go HTML first, then PDF are really what make the difference. And so within just a few minutes, we have Claude output a very nice looking PDF, almost a one-pager with some of it going into page 2. Very solid with the structure, very solid with the colors that I requested, and overall just seeming to follow my instructions correctly. And something interesting that you'll notice is that our Claude chat actually got cut in half. So on the left half, we have the actual chat, and on the right half, we're going to have the display of our document here. And documents like these, which Claude is going to display on the right side of the screen, and include in these sort of boxes where you can just simply download them, are going to be called artifacts. Now, artifacts are no more than just files, but the key difference with Claude is that they make these files way more convenient. Before having to download the file and then open it up on your own computer, Claude actually shows you how they look inside of here. It allows you to very quickly download them, and when you want to make any adjustments or revisions, it's pretty much going to follow the same process. And you're going to see the revised version instantly pop up. You're not even going to have to refresh or close and open something up. This is really the definition of a great file creation experience. And so now that we've covered basic outputs and we'll get into reusable, and we will get a bit deeper into reusable templates later on, we can now move on to pillar number 3, which is going to be declaration page and accord extraction. Now once again, this is a relatively simple use case, but what you can do here is drop in any carrier PDF, get structured information about it, and this kind of serves as a foundation for everything. Claude reading through a file, analyzing its content, and then giving you an output is literally how every single workflow, every single Claude chat, and how every process for a result actually happens. And so here, working from the same chat that we were before, I've dropped in a sample accord certificate and also a sample declarations page. So over here, as you can see, I first asked Claude for a one-pager based on these 2 documents, but then I went ahead and actually stopped it because all I did is I wanted a simple text output. And here we see that Claude is walking us through the steps that it's taking. So it was extracting and synthesizing the information. But over here, we can see how all of the information is extracted in a very simple way. So instead of switching between different screens, instead of switching between documents and having to read through the documents, just go ahead. Oftentimes, what you can do is just upload your documents to Claude. Once again, I would recommend that you upgrade to the Claude team plan, or even better, the enterprise plan. Of course, these are just demo details, but you can see how Claude is very quickly able to extract key information and pretty much can provide it to you just as fast. So now that we've covered pillar 3, which is document information extraction, we can now move on to some of the more exciting stuff, which is going to be basic connectors. Now, for those of you who are familiar with integrations, connectors are basically the exact same thing, but they just made 100 times simpler with Claude. Now, the way connectors work is if I just go down over here to my chat and click on the plus icon over here, you'll see that a menu pops up so I can add files, take a screenshot, add things to projects, which we'll get into in our next pillar. And then I can also add skills, which we'll also get into. And then I can add connectors. Now, fundamentally, what connectors are is they're basically integrations with platforms. So over here, you'll see that I have a connection with Fireflies, which is basically my AI note taker. I have a connection with Gmail. I have a connection with Google Calendar, and I have a connection with Higgsfield, also something we'll get into later. But just to demonstrate how it works, let me ask Claude to pull everything in my calendar for today. So over here, I've asked Claude to check what I have lined up in my calendar today. And right now it's going to perform some thinking, and very instantly you can see that it goes straight to Google Calendar, and it's going to list all of the calendar events in my calendar. Now over here it's going to give me my calendar details. I'll have to blur much of the details out, but you can see how it pulls the information from time to time. And not only can you use a connector like Google Calendar to look at your calendar and tell you how it looks, but you can also, but together with it, you can actually create meetings, block off times, and so on. Now, it's a very similar thing with Gmail, because with Gmail, you can ask it to send a draft messages, read through your entire inbox, and even mark emails as spam, delete them, essentially the full menu of email inbox management. So at the end of the day, what basic connectors allow you to do is to connect to sources of data, and even if it means making you 5 or 10% more productive, you can connect them in a matter of 30 seconds. Matter of fact, I'm not even going to break down how you log in, because really all it is just Claude asking you to sign in with your Google or your Microsoft account to make the connection happen. So now that we've got basic connectors taken care of, let's move on to the last pillar of level 1, which is going to be projects. And essentially what projects inside of Claude do is they save context per use. You're creating a workspace with additional context and instructions beyond what Claude usually has. And over here, you're able to house things like SOPs and templates. And pretty much the key idea of this is that you can get consistent outputs. So whereas in a normal Claude chat, it might still lack the context or the instruction or the information to perform something, because you can actually customize the instructions, the context, as well as what files you upload inside of the project section. That basically creates a workspace, which without any of your involvement is going to be able to give you accurate answers. So if I go back inside of my Claude and I go to my project section, you'll see here that I have different project names. I actually just renamed some of them because I don't want to be blurring as many details within this video. Just to be totally clear, this is my meta ads command center. And so the reason I call things command centers is because when you're able to upload so much context into your projects, customize the instructions, and allow Claude to have a very robust memory of you. For example, if I went inside of my instructions here, without leaking too many details about myself, you'll see here that I have a pretty long master prompt here. Then it has some memory about me. So this is context and information for itself that it actually generates as we continuously have chats. And then it has these files, and these can do anything. They can provide context, they can provide references, they can provide templates, they can provide examples. And essentially the point I'm getting to is that you can do a lot with projects. Now, just for demo purposes, let's go ahead and create a project ourselves. And this project will be responsible for issuing COI. Now, to create a new project, simply click on create new project. I'm going to name this a demo COI issuance project, create the project. And over here, we're going to have an instructions field as well as a files field. So I've uploaded 3 files into here, an SOP for the issuance of certificates, a summary of the carrier context, as well as a style guide. And then over here in the project instructions, I'm going to paste in the main project system prompt. And so over here, it's designed to work in a very specific way. So it's going to tell it how things work. We're going to tell it what is usually provided, tell it what kind of behaviors to follow, and it's going to give some hard guesses as well as some hard no's. So essentially telling it what it always does and telling it what it should never do. That also describes the output format. And so this is just a very standard set of instructions for a project. I'm going to go ahead and click on save. And into here, I'm just going to paste in a sample prompt as if it's a sample conversation. And as I've been saying consistently throughout this video, if you want to be able to paste in PII as well as other potentially sensitive information, just go ahead and check out Claude's other plans, whether it's the team plan or the enterprise plan. Both of them have much better compliance than just a regular one. But regardless, here I'm just going to give it this sample prompt, and let's go ahead and see how it actually responds. So over here, based on its SOP and the context that we have given it, as well as the overall project instructions that we've set out for this, it goes ahead and gives us the verification result of pass. So it actually performs checks and verifies whether all the requirements are basically fulfilled. Then it's going to go ahead and give us the certificate details, as well as the cover email draft to this, and even the AMS activity log entry, that you can see just how effective a process like this can be. And just to throw Claude a bit of a curveball here, let's see how it responds. Based on the project instructions, when we give it this statement, it should go ahead and say that an actual agent should be processing the COI and just taking care of the entire matter, but we'll see what it does here. So you can see here that Claude actually does exactly what we want over here. It performs the 5-point check here once again. It says that 2 of these details will prevent us from issuing this. Here it's going to go ahead and say that the certificate details are held, not issuable as requested. For the cover email, it's going to say that it's holding, no coverage is currently promised. And then it gives us the AMS activity log entry once again, so you can see how its specific instructions and clear enough context, Claude will not only do what it's supposed to do, as in this case, but it will also not do what it's not supposed to do. And so this is really the strength of a project. Instead of using general Claude, which just has so much context and so much potentially unnecessary information, you can dig into the idea of Claude projects and pretty much be creating your own projects. This was relatively simple. I just uploaded 3 context documents. I added some instructions. So now that we've covered projects, we are officially done with level 1, which is to consume information. As I was saying, and just a general reminder, once again, compliance or security, make sure that there's no raw client PIR in the consumer chart. Just get the Claude Enterprise plan. Trust me, it's worth it. And overall, just know what's safe to upload. Now, moving on to level number 2, which is connect. This is going to look a bit different. Whereas before we were using Claude in the browser, we're now going to switch over to Claude Desktop and our data. So here we are in the Claude Desktop app. If you don't yet have it, it's pretty straightforward. Just search up Claude Desktop Download, and you should be able to download it and sign in with your account through the browser. Now, in a similar fashion to how we did things with Pillar 1 of Level 1 and Pillar 1 of Level 2, I'm just going to quickly explain how Claude Desktop works, how it's different from the browser, and how it's going to build the bridge between Level 1 as well as Level 3, 4, and so on. So the most striking difference between the simple Claude browser chat as well as the Claude Desktop app is going to be the addition of these 2 tabs, Claude Cowork as well as Claude Code. Now for Cowork, it's really in the name. Cowork is something that's going to work alongside you, and it's going to be able to work in a certain project or folder. It's going to be able to securely access your computer and organize your screenshots or your files, actually analyze the files on your computer, and do things like open up your browser and actually take actions for you. As for Claude Code, which is what many agents and agencies have done, that's essentially an executive assistant or basically a manager that can take action. So for example, a use case for Claude Code that's impressive but not even extreme is going to be its ability to create YouTube thumbnails, for instance. And this is going to be specifically relevant for my case, but just to give you an idea of how it works, it can perform research and find some of the most high converting thumbnails, then use a reference photo of me, grab those high performing thumbnails, identify how it can put my own unique spin on those thumbnails, then put my face into those thumbnails. That's a pretty advanced workflow, but it's able to carry that out for me with little to no of my own involvement. And a use case for insurance, for example, could be using a specific aspect of Claude Code called routines. So routines are powerful. An example use case for routines could be checking the AMS or renewals on a daily basis at 6:30 a.m. And if it finds that there are any renewals, it's going to go ahead and grab the dates. If your agency uses Slack, Claude is actually going to send a reminder or a notification to all of your teammates that a renewal date is approaching. And we're going to get into this in just a second, but just know that the desktop app really where the use cases start to become more and more powerful. With pillar number 1 successfully explained, we can now move on to pillar 2, which is going to be MCP connectors. Now, what MCP stands for is going to be Model Context Protocol. And this basically means that Claude, as an AI model, is going to have the context protocol, or in other words, a very simple way to integrate with other platforms and services and carry out those tasks without overly complex integrations. So that sounded like a mess. Let's use an example from one of my earlier videos, which is using a service called Higgsfield to generate a video or an image for an insurance ad. And what MP connectors basically allow you to do is to have tangible creative output, so basically images or videos that you can see or produce, easily download and use for yourself. And to explain it very simply, when you're at MCP connectors, you're basically plugging in new powers. So to really explain to you how MCP connectors work would be best done with an example. And the easiest way to add an MCP is to go right to your main page over here, click on the plus sign, hover over the connectors here, and you'll see that there's a way to add connectors, manage connectors, and so on. And I already have connectors inside of here. And so in fact, many of the connectors that Claude has are actually going to use the MCP. So Fireflies, for example, which is my AI note taker that I then connect with Claude to be able to pull notes from my meetings and so on, has an MCP connection with Claude so that I can access my notes, get all of the details about my meetings, and much more. The same thing can be said about Higgsfield, which you will be using specifically for this example. If I go ahead and click on Manage Connectors, I'll be taken over to this place, to this connectors tab here. And you'll see here that Higgsfield is a custom connector, but there are a bunch of connectors. You can connect so many apps that I've honestly lost track of which ones I should be adding. When you look at Higgsfield over here, it's going to have access to 28 interactive tools, 9 write/delete tools, as well as 3 app-only tools. And this adds up to 40 or more tools that it has access to. And so that is why we have the MCP, because with just a few clicks, we can give Claude access to all of these abilities here, rather than setting up individual integrations for each one of the abilities, if that makes sense. And so Higgsfield at its core is basically an AI service that allows you to generate images and videos. And the way I connected it is I went over to the Add Custom Connector button over here. I named this my Hicksfield connector. Over here for the remote MCP server URL, I'm just going to drop in this one. Every single app with an MCP is going to have a link that looks something like this, which you will paste inside of here. Normally, I would go ahead and click on add over here, but because I already have a connector, I'm not going to do that. But just know that when you first add a connector, it's most often just going to take you to your browser where you will log in with the platform account. So if I was setting up Hicksfield again, it would probably take me to my browser, ask me to sign in with Hicksfield, and that's when the connection would be set up. Honestly, this is very awesome. You can see here that with some of the interactive tools, it's able to generate audio, generate images, as well as generate videos. So let's go ahead and take a shot at generating the video. So to do that, I'm just going to get back to this main page over here. And so here I've created a sample script for an insurance ad I'd like to generate. If you haven't yet seen my video about the ad system, exposing the same ad creation system billion-dollar lead vendors use, you can check it up here to get some more information. But over here, let's say I've created a sample script. And oftentimes for Claude and Hicksfield, what's important for me to know as well is how long it would take to speak this entire script and how long the actual video ad would be. So now let's get into exploration mode with Claude. It's going to probably start by asking me a few questions, telling me how long the video will take, and so on. So over here, Claude has communicated to me how long the script would take. And now we're going to take the next step. I'm going to ask it to tighten the script for one of my video ads. And because the video clips Hicksfield generates are only 15 seconds long, it means that for a 35 to 40 second long clip, we would logically need 3 different videos, which is why me and Claude have to first go ahead and shorten the script and only then start generating 3 clips. I'm not going to bore you with the wait time, so I'll pause the video here and I'll come back once everything is generated and ready for you. And so as it's generating, just to give you an idea of how this looks like, I went ahead and told it to go ahead and generate those 3 clips at 15 seconds each. And over here, you can see that it uses the Hicksfield MCP, so specifically the Explore Models action here. Then it does some thinking, confirms the details, and then it actually fires the production of the both talking clips. So we can see here how it uses the MCP to do all of this code and all of this prompting, and then uses the generate video action for clip 1. Then it does the exact same thing for clip 2. Then we can see here that it actually generated the result. MCP is simply so powerful that it also gives you the added convenience of being able to download whatever asset is created using this download button. And so with all of this in mind and the Claude Hicksfield MCP combination clearly being functional here, stitch the clips together and I'll stitch the clips together, and in a second, you'll see a glimpse of the result on the screen. So that was a bit longer and more complex an area with the MCP connectors. But now that we're done with the MCP connectors, we can actually start connecting legitimate data sources to Claude. So this includes things like CRM and Google Sheets, pulling call information from your dialing platform, so say Ricochet 360, and then tracking and analyzing this information live. And real quick, if you're an insurance agency or an insurance agent and you'd like to figure out how to automate your agency's operations or scale your lead generation without having to buy any leads and do it on a fully pay-for-performance basis, feel free to book a one-on-one consultation with me and my team using the first calendar link in the description. And now let's get back to the video. The way we're going to demonstrate Claude's data pulling and data access capabilities is with a sheet of leads. And this is a very common scenario that many agency owners find them in. They get weekly, bi-weekly, daily spreadsheets of leads. And oftentimes a lot of these are still manually being tracked inside of the CRM as well as the AMS. So right now we're going to put Claude to the test and see if it's able to access my sheet over here, which I've purposely named Untitled Spreadsheet, just to see if it can find all of this information and give it to me. All of this information is fake. It's totally demo only. And so the most efficient way to ensure that Claude will have access to our sheet is by going over to the connectors tab over here, and we're going to click on Browse Connectors. Over here, we're going to see if we're able, using the Google Drive connector, to access our sheet. So we're going to go ahead and add this. Let's go to instantly sign me in, and very conveniently, Google has just told me that I need to verify that it's me. So now that I've verified everything and I am back, I can now sign into Google Drive using Claude. Claude is really quickly just going to ask me for access to Google Drive. And now that we are connected, it's going to let me know we can head back to Google Drive. You can see that we got the notification that we are connected to it. So here I'm going to ask if it can find my sheet of leads inside of my Google account, and I'm going to tell it that the leads should have been uploaded today. That's correct because this was the only sheet uploaded today. But let's see if it's able to realize that. Even the title here, we see that it first takes the step of finding a sheet that has the word lead in the title, but then it realizes that there are no results, and then it finds the sample insurance leads.csv uploaded today, and it even gives me the link to it. It's really nice that it was able to find the sheet and it gives me the link to it, but it would be even better if it could tell me what the distribution between the commercial lines, personal lines, and other types of insurance the sheet has. So here it's going to once again ask me to pull the file. Here we can see that it's going through the logic, and here it sees that there are 40 leads, and it gives me all of the distribution. So it tells me that there's X amount of commercial lines, Y amount of personal lines, and even separate line. Of course, maybe pulling the premium distribution and getting the distribution of the commercial and personal lines might not be the most common use case for pulling information. But once again, this is just for the sake of showing how quickly and accurately Claude is able to pull information from your data sources. And the same thing goes for CRMs. You can oftentimes connect Claude to whichever CRM you're using, whether it be Agency, Zoom, Go High Level, or anything else. Here we can see that it calculates the premiums across the 40 leads, gives us the average premium, gives us all of the distribution, and this is pretty awesome. Previously, this would have taken years to pull. We can go as far as duplicating the sheet within the spreadsheet. Now, what I asked it before to do was actually download the CSV, but what it can do now for me is convert it to a real Google Sheet and then create multiple tabs in it. So you can see here that Claude is not only good at actually reading and pulling the information from our sheet, but it can also duplicate the sheets, add in additional rows to the sheets, sort them by priority, and so on. And these are the exact actions that actually happen in a CRM. One person gets moved from one pipeline to another. You can fetch all of the leads from a CRM or a certain pipeline, or better yet, a specific pipeline stage. And really the opportunities are just limitless. If you're using a relatively modern CRM, let's say Agency Zoom or Go High Level or something of the sort, it's very likely that you will be able to connect it to Claude Code. It seems like Claude has once again impressed us with pillar number 3. So at this point, let's go ahead and move on to pillar number 4, which will be Book of Business Analytics. And so because demo, we would need Claude to have access to an AMS, and for some reason it's difficult to get access to a demo account with all the permissions that I would need to connect it to Claude. So for Book of Business Analytics, when we are referring to read-only pull, that means Claude will only read or basically pull the information, but not write any of the existing information. And so the reason this is helpful is because Claude can read your entire book. Just make sure that if you want to dabble in any of these use cases, get the Claude Enterprise plan. You can be exporting your full book of business, or oftentimes more accurately, just whatever you have in your CRM without any writes, so no adjustments of actual information in there. Then you can have Claude scan every single account, the lines held, the premiums, as well as the last contacts. And oftentimes what it can do is surface monoline accounts. So for example, ones that have an auto only or a home only policy, then also cross-sell gaps. Now, this does come with some AMS platforms, but despite this, Claude is useful for that. And then it's all just evaluating the overall concentration risk. And with these 3 abilities, and I'm sure that I'm just scratching the surface here, with only these 3, you can generate a report, making the most important things, readying the information for producers, and just providing a numbers report. Because so many people say that they are numbers oriented, that they really care about numbers, but nobody even bothers to compile a simple report, look at the numbers, and actually draw some conclusions that could help them out, just because it can be a bit tedious or a bit boring. We'll get into this inside of level 3, but this report is the exact input that's going to feed the level 3 renewal as well as cross-sell engine. So with this in mind, now that we've crossed off pillar number 4, Book of Business Analytics, we can now move on to pillar 5, which could be commission reconciliation. And how this works on a high level is it basically ingests the carrier statements in the form of a PDF document, a CSV, whatever it may be, and then it matches that information versus what was expected by the AMS. And depending on the scenarios, for example, it could flag pretty significant amounts of premium each year being lost, which is why this can be an interesting case to give Claude. And just to quickly demo it out on a fresh slate. So over here, I've given Claude 3 files. Here, we're going to have a sample commission statement in the form of a CSV, as well as a sample commission, as well as the same statement in the form of a PDF. And then we have the agency commission tracker. So now we can compare all of these documents, and pretty much Claude has already understood the assignment. It's going to read all 3 files and it's going to reconcile them, systematically reconciling the tracker rows, and pretty soon likely giving us a result. And so here it finished up the reconciliation, and now it's going to build the output file with the tracker's empty columns pretty much filled out. And here we can see that it performs that reconciliation. It even gives us a second flag here. But overall, it's nice to know that Claude can generate full Excel files, display them as artifacts on the right-hand side over here, give us full summaries, and really not just be able to consume the information, but actually give us reports, give us clean numbers. It helps us perform things that otherwise would not have been possible in a matter of just a few minutes or less. So now that we've quick look at commission reconciliation, we are now done with level 2, which is connecting Claude Desktop with our data and actually starting to take some action, that being creating things like ads, connecting Google Sheets to Claude, mapping out a workflow for Book of Business Analytics, as well as performing more advanced things like the commission reconciliation. And at this point, we can now get into the most bulky level of all 5 that we have prepared today. Here we are systematizing. We're actually going to create repeatable systems and other assets that Claude can use. But now let's get into level 3, starting with the first pillar, skills. And by this point, some of the people that are more advanced and familiar with Claude have probably heard of skills are basically documents that teach Claude a process once. And because Claude is so smart at this point, you can load up 50 skills, and because of the ways that skills are structured, they're going to run the same every time. And you don't even have to tell Claude to use skill X or skill Y or skill Z. You basically have an entire automation library that Claude can easily access reliably perform certain processes. And so with that in mind, let's go ahead back to Claude Cowork over here, zooming past the sheets that we were previously given. If we go over to settings and then we go into capabilities and scroll all the way down, you'll see a section called skills. And it says that skills have now moved over to customize. Absolutely no problem. And here are all of the skills that I personally myself use, and you'll probably recognize this skill. Over here, you'll just see that I uploaded 2 new skills, that being the COI-intake skill, as well as the policy summary skill. And if we take a look at the policy summary skill, you'll probably recognize it. The goal of it is to convert a policy or a declaration page PDF into a 1-page summary a non-insurance person can understand. And if you recall what we did earlier in this video, we created a demo COI project that would be issuing them. So what we've now done is, instead of having a project where a project can be very helpful, we have now converted that project into essentially a very short skill that's going to allow us to pretty much do the same exact task. And so what's important about skills is that they have their names, which Claude can basically use as a tool. So if it wants to use the skill, it's going to say, I'm using the policy-summary skill, pretty straightforward. And so as for the descriptions, this is exactly what Claude uses to determine which skills to use, as you can see over here. With this split into 3 main components, we are able to create repeatable skills as we are with this COI-intake. And so once again, this is the exact skill that we previously used over here. And I believe I was actually on this screen when I was talking about the COI intake skill when I first uploaded that policy and got a blue-purple 1-page document, 1-page I was showing you. But regardless, you can essentially see how skills systematize all of your processes. And perhaps one of the most important skills is actually going to be Claude's default skill creator. And this is a skill that helps you create new skills and actually improve them. So whenever you want to create a new skill for systemizing yet another process, Claude is going to use the skill called skill creator to create a new skill. And so now that we have taken care of skills, we can now move on to Claude Cowork and specifically one of its core abilities, which is going to be browser automation. It automates your browser in a way that APIs can't. So whereas things that rely on a chat window and basically Claude using each of the abilities that the MCP has, Claude Cowork can click through your browser just like I am doing right now and basically take actions for you. And a common use case is Cowork clicking portals for you. And we will go a bit more in depth on this in level 4, which is where I actually show you how you can automate quoting with Cowork. But just to give you another example of Cowork working, let's head back over to Claude here and then head over to Cowork in this left on the sidebar over here. And so what I'm going to tell Cowork to do is to go to my Chrome browser window. It will see a website called excalidraw.com, which is actually where I'm showing you this entire diagram. And I'm going to ask it to analyze all 21 pillars here and return me an organized summary of each one across the 5 different levels that we have over here. And you'll see over here that at this point, the diagram is a bit messed up. So even I myself am curious to see how it's going to go about doing this. But with that in mind, let's go ahead and kick it off and see what it can do. And you'll see here that Cowork has started working on this. Now, just a few more things about Cowork that I can explain while I was getting ready to do that is that over here are the 2 modes for it asking. It can ask before acting, so it's going to pause so we can approve each action, or it can act without asking. Because insurance requires compliance, and Claude is not just something that we can play around with, and it's something that you definitely need an enterprise play for. Act without asking should only be used for things that aren't PII facing, AMS facing, or anything like that. This should be done for tasks like these where they are a bit tedious and not serious. So I'm going to show you how Cowork can actually automate a big portion of the coding process for you. But what I'm trying to say here is that you don't just want to give Cowork access to your entire AMS or very sensitive information, because at the end of the day, you do still want to remain in control. But we're seeing here that Claude is apparently using Claude and Chrome. So I'm curious to see how that looks like. So this looks absolutely awesome. We have Claude going ahead and taking control of my computer here. We have everything glowing red. And here Claude is going to use something called computer use. And this is basically an ability that allows it to get access to my computer. And over here, because it's on this tab, it looks like it's already using Claude inside of Chrome. And it's just a matter of time until we get our summary of the 21 pillars that we have on the diagram. So here, now that I stepped away for a bit too long, actually, Claude has successfully finished. Of course, this was a task where I could have easily screenshotted some parts of the diagram and given it to Claude, but just the fact alone that it can do it itself, go into your Chrome browser, go to the correct tab, take screenshots, and then compile this outline is impressive in of itself. So this kind of covers everything that we have been going through and what we will go through. And so this is just a very nice example of how we can use Claude Cowork to automate our browser. And this is going to get more impressive in level 4, which is going to be delegation. But now that we are done with pillar 2, Claude Cowork, we can now move on to pillar 3. And pillar 3 is all about renewals. This accomplished inside of Claude Code that is known as routines. And essentially, if we go back into here, I'm in the code section and I go down to the routines subsection. What you will see here is that routines are things that can be kicked off on a certain schedule or through a certain trigger. For example, let's say I wanted to create a new routine for monitoring my AMS So let's say I'm using something like Now Search, which is an AMS. I would go ahead and I would click on create a cloud routine, and let's just give this a name. And essentially here are the instructions for the routine. So just like any other feature inside of Claude Code, routines require a set of instructions. And because a routine, whether in Claude or in real life, is just logically a more step-by-step procedure that you take every day and a behavior that you repeat every day, it can function off a numbered list as we see here. The first step is renewals during the next 90 days. Then we are prioritizing them by the premium amount, as well as the days remaining, segmenting them into 3 different categories. So 90 to 61, 60 to 31, and 30 to 0 days out. And for each of those, draft a brief outreach template tailored to the timeline for each policy. Then for the timeline specifically, draft a brief outreach template, email or task tailored to the timeline for each policy that this has not been done for before. Emphasize urgency for the 30-day group. Include account name, premium expiration date, and producer assignment inside of each draft. Present drafts to 30-22, 21-15, 14-8, and 7 to 0 days, ready for producer review and approval before sending. And then mark the policies for which messages have been drafted and the respective reviews that have been sent to producers to avoid day-by-day overlaps and repeats. And then if no renewals are due in the next 90 days, confirm briefly. So logically, something like this, we would have running daily at a certain time, ideally before people would start work. So here we can actually go ahead and adjust it by the minute. So say I wanted to trigger at the very precise time at 7:22 a.m. I could go ahead and do that, for example. And just to give you an idea, you can trigger in any sort of way. You can trigger once, hourly, weekdays, weekly, custom. It's absolutely amazing to see that you have total flexibility when scheduling. And over here, of course, we would add connectors. In this case, we would likely not need Fireflies, Gmail, Google Calendar, Google Drive, or Hixio. What we would rather do is create a custom connector to our AMS. So say Now Search, for example, and then after you would do that, you would come back here, basically select that connector and be able to fire away. Of course, you also need to add it to a repository, which is a folder like structure, which Claude actually needs to live in because we're deploying this in a cloud. And so typically repository is basically a system for storing like a big folder for storing all of your code. But just to keep this simple for now, I've shown you how to set up the instructions for a routine, how the daily scheduling portion of this works. And of course, I've shown you how to add a connector. So when you would connect your AMS, you would create a routine just like this. And as I mentioned before, all of these resources, so the set of instructions here, all of them are going to be available in the resource hub that can link in the description. So you can check that out as well. Perfect. And now that we have tackled Claude routines, so specifically the renewals use case, the next thing for us to tackle is going to be CSR microtasks. And so these CSR microtasks are going to include things like the first notice of loss, intake triage, endorsement or change preparation, and routing to the correct CSR if needed. And something like routing to the right CSR if needed is what we're going to introduce as we get over to level 4, which is going to be delegation. So a lot of the agents and agencies that we have worked with have simply decided to opt for Claude scales instead of making the process entirely autonomous. And there's a lot to be said for that, as I'll show you with the demo. The key idea here is that the human is essentially overseeing the action. They're seeing as Claude gives them an output in a much faster time period than it would have taken for them to do it themselves. And they're making sure everything is correct. And then after that, they're just taking the next step. And then after that, they're taking the next step in the sequence, although it's in Claude can handle more than just microtasks for CSRs. So back in the customize section, as well as the skills, I've added 2 new skills. This is going to be the FNOL intake, as well as the endorsement prep. And to demonstrate Claude's remarkable ability to use these skills in a very structured and simple manner, let's go with Claude's first task. So here I am just acting like a CSR. Normally, I would just put in this. I would just copy paste the email and tell Claude that the FNOL email just arrived. And this is not a binary scenario. In this sort of situation, we've provided most of the information, even though there's some uncertainty on the driver's end, for example, on whether it's their home or their auto policy. So Claude should realize that even though it has a big portion of the information, it doesn't have all of it, which is exactly what we see here. It kind of raises a red flag about the record. And if we scroll down through here, Claude is obviously not able to do everything for us. So it first tells us to confirm the correct auto policy, then verify coverage, set up claim, get the details, request the photos, and so on. So even when Claude can't fully complete the task for you, generate a full document for an FNOL, and instantly start setting up a claim, it is still a great guide to have, especially if you have very robust SOPs. And now just to test out the endorsement skill, we're going to paste in this email. With the FNOL and the endorsement skills, our goal is to basically save CSRs a lot of time. These insurance agencies pick up on every call, and that is a big problem. So if we can resolve some of the time waste and the downstream and repetitive daily actions that an insurance CSR has to take, for example, then we can logically improve call handling as well as other aspects of their job. And ultimately, that just leads to increased efficiency and productivity. Even in this demo, Claude is able to provide an insurance level overview. It tells us what is missing across all three parts of it and drafts a reply to the person. And all the CSR has to do is just make sure that Claude did everything correctly. And they've just saved maybe 5, maybe even 10 minutes on this one case, making them much more efficient. And a lot of people will say that cutting a task down from 5 minutes to 2 minutes has only a 3-minute impact. But we're not measuring in the differences, we're measuring in the proportions. And in that case, going from 5 minutes to 2 minutes means that you're spending 2.5 times less time. It means that you're spending 2.5x less time than you would normally. And at a macro level, we're handling tens of these cases per day. It just makes them exponentially more efficient. So I'm sure we can all agree that Pillar 4 was straightforward, but it was also very impactful. But with that being said, let's now move on to Pillar 5, which is specifically quote comparison. Now, ideally, what Claude does with quote comparison is it reads carrier quote PDFs, then it normalizes the coverages, and in a step-by-step manner, it's able to generate a clean side-by-side proposal with proper branding and color palettes. Now, the reason quote comparison is a very neat skill is because it saves a lot of time, and that's very obvious. Instead of grabbing 5 different quotes and trying to create a document that presents all of them, marking all of their advantages, and not to mention making it easy for the potential client to understand it in a very simple way. Having a skill makes things much more fast, more organized, and productive overall. So if we once again go to Claude, go to the skills section, over here we have a quote comparison skill. And this quote comparison skill has a very detailed step-by-step process on how to actually generate a ready, polished, print-ready client-facing insurance quote comparison from multiple carrier quotes. And of course, a demo is the easiest way to show you its functionality. So let's go ahead and upload 5 quotes from my computer to see how the skill actually works. So as you'll see here, I have 5 different quotes uploaded, all from different carriers. So let's go ahead and tell it to generate a proposal for our client. And you'll notice that in all of these demonstrations, I only give Claude a few words besides just uploading all of my files here. And it's not that I'm lazy, but it's just at this point, I realized that if I tell Claude to create a quote comparison proposal, it's going to go ahead and match that with the exact skill. And it's going to do that pretty easily, which is why skills are very asymmetrical in their ability to systemize, because once you document a skill once, and you can still continuously improve it by all means, you are then able to repeat the same process with little to no effort. And that's exactly what has made Claude so powerful in recent time. And just like I said, I gave it a few words and now it's already reading the quote comparison skill before building the proposal. In just a second, it's probably going to go through each of the PDFs, then map out the structure, and then delivers a completely ready PDF. And you'll see here that in just a few minutes, Claude outputs us a 6-page client-ready PDF, selects the top 3 carriers and ranks them, then it drops 2 carriers. And so the idea here is that Claude is doing all of the heavy lifting. We are just the orchestrator. We're giving Claude all of the documents it needs. We're giving it a few lines of instructions so it knows which skills to use. And then it does all of the reasoning for you and it creates the PDF. So if we take a look at this, and you'll notice that my preferred color palette is blue. Aesthetically speaking, you could change this to any color, to any formatting, any sort of font. But when strictly looking at how complete and these comparisons are, we have a recommendation or a review of the person's coverage requirements, comparison at a glance, recommended alternatives over here, coverage notes in plain English, 2 carriers that were reviewed but not recommended, then some next steps, and finally some important disclaimers. And so in just a few minutes, we went from very raw information from the quotes to these random PDFs over here and a 5-word sentence to instruct Claude, the complete proposal over here. And if that's not leverage and the best use of your time, then I honestly would not know what it is. So it seems pretty clear by this point. We've knocked out quote comparison. Moving on from here, we are going to have the agency brain. And there are multiple ways to set out the agency brain. Some people prefer setting up a Claude project with all the carrier information, but we found that with many independent agencies that we have worked with, based for a knowledge base that projects offer is actually often not enough and unnecessarily overloads Claude. But explained conceptually, the way you can set up the agency brain is by going into Claude code over here. And so if I open up my sidebar, you'll see here that I am in the code section, not in the chat or cowork. And as I was explaining before with the routine setup, Claude code is most often to live within a specific folder. So for example, AK, my initials, is a folder, a working directory, a workspace, whatever you would like to call it. Because uploading, when you're using Claude code in the folder, there's still several ways to go about it. Oftentimes, you can just put the PDFs, the Word documents of the carrier appetites and other massive volumes of agency context, compliance disclosures, etc., inside of the folder itself. But in other cases, you would use something called RAG. And RAG stands for Retrieval Augmented Generation. And basically, it's just a fancy system that matches your query, where basically whatever words you give to Claude to specific documents basically match whatever words you give to Claude. And this works with absolutely immense accuracy. You can plug in hundreds of files into a RAG setup. Some platforms that are often used for this are Supabase as well as Obsidian. But as I said, you can put in any compliance, appetite, or other agency context and information into a RAG setup. And when you give Claude the ability to pull information information using its RAG capabilities and you put the skills within the same folder, so you give Claude access to that as well, you can basically have the two work in tandem. And this resolves the problem of being able to use every skill while having limited context, or being a context, but only being able to use a limited number of skills. If you don't have the previous pillar set up, so for example, the skills, pillar number 1 of level 3, then there's no point in having so much context if Claude is not going to be using that context in conjunction with all of the skills that you have. But so now that we have the agency brain handled, we can now move on to the level 4. And this is delegation. Between all of the layers that progressively Claude gets more powerful and more autonomous. Whereas with level 1 is us giving Claude the files, feeding it all of the information at the consumption phase. And then level 2, where we made some connections with Higgsfield, for example, and other MCP connectors. With level 3, we were able to systematize a great portion of our work using things like skills, cowork, routines, and much more. And with level 4, we're actually delegating a big portion of our work. One more thing, if you're an insurance agency or you're an agent and you're curious to see how you could apply these use cases for yourself or automate your lead generation with proven AI systems that you own, not have to buy any leads, and do it on our fully pay-for-performance guarantee basis, feel free to book a one-on-one consultation with our team using the first link in the description to find out more. And now let's get back to the video. And so unfortunately, with a lot of the other use cases that involved an AMS, because for some apparent reason, it's difficult to get your hands on an AMS account with full integration and MCP capabilities, I'm going to be conceptually, but very specifically explaining some of these use cases, with pillar number 2 actually being a full demo. But starting off at pillar 1, which is going to be the COI autoresponder. This is basically building on some of the earlier levels where we explained the COIs. And so the way the COI autoresponder works at high level, and I'm going to get into the deeper breakdown over here, is it watches the email. So for example, if your agency has a support email like support@xyzagency.com or a office@xyzagency.com, it doesn't really matter. As long as you have that one email, what Claude can do, and more specifically Claude routines, because they can be kicked off by a trigger or a webhook. Claude can instantly get activated as soon as it senses that an email about a COI has been sent. And from there, the workflow looks like this. First, Claude is going to use the MCP connection or any other sort of integration to verify the policy inside of the AMS, generate the accord, specifically the accord 25 in many cases, then plus log a big portion. And for 85% of the cases, it can be done fully automatically with less effort, but this does not mean that it should do it autonomously. The way a lot of these setups should work, and most of them should not be fully autonomous, is a human in the loop setup. And the way this works is you can delegate pretty much all of the work to Claude. 85% of COI cases can be handled with just Claude, but you don't want the danger that comes with compliance, even though I hope you are on the Claude Enterprise plan. So what you want to do is have an HIT or a human in the loop setup. As soon as Claude is done, send a message to Slack to one of the team members. A team member can have a look at it, verify that everything is correct, and only then send off information. But in sensitive use cases, so the other 15% that can't be done automatically and require human involvement, you're obviously going to need a human to step in. And even in those 15% of the cases, you guessed it, you could set up something like Claude Scales to make the process even simpler. But just the fact that you can pretty much fully automate 85% of cases is already impressive in of itself. Now, there are some alternatives for how the autoresponder can work. So for example, it can use something called Claude channels. Typically, Claude routines are going to be enough. And now that I've given you the high-level overview, let me just help you visualize it in a simpler way and with more details. And not to mention, this COI autoresponder can actually run 24/7. However, the human in the loop setup still remains. You do not want to be directly interacting and sending information to clients. You still want to be overseeing the full process. We have the certificate requests hitting the inbox. So for example, certificates@agencyname.com, although more likely it would be support@agencyname.com, because realistically, most agencies will not have a specific email geared for certificates. And once it hits the inbox, a Claude routines webhook, so basically something that triggers as soon as information hits it, or in an alternative, Claude channels, is going to sense that. Here, Claude is notified. It watches and it analyzes the inbox, and specifically that email which was sent, and it kicks off the workflow. Claude is able to parse, thoroughly analyze, and classify the information. It identifies whether it's a standard versus exception case through the AMS API, or better yet, the NCP. Claude verifies the policy. It identifies whether it's active, limit at, or below actual. And with say AMS, I commonly refer to platforms like NowCerts, EasyLinks. Of course, the process for them looks slightly different because, as I mentioned, for me personally, a demo account was hard to get my hands on. And some of these platforms are different in terms of how they allow you to get API access and such things. But after that, for step 5, it generates the Accord 25. And then of course, human in the loop step in between person who requested would be emailed. The information would be logged to the AMS, so something like the activity log to be specific. And as I was saying before, 80% of cases can be handled with zero human touch throughout the process, but still required right before it sends to the client. And it's not uncommon for 50 hours per month or more to be reclaimed with this. And it was pretty short turnaround. Of course, for some cases, it might be 3 minutes. It might be 5. For some, it might be a bit more. But with such just one exception over here, the CSR is no case limits mismatch. There's special wording not on policy, and other edge cases, the CSR would be notified and the staff would be able to properly handle that. Now, after pillar 1 of level 4, we are then able to move on to cowork quoting. And this is probably one of my favorite cases. If an agent or employee enters the client information into one portal once, or even has the information in a very raw or unorganized state, what cowork and specifically browser control can do is autofill carrier forms. And this covers what many comparative raters can. So for example, there's a comparative rater called Bolt Penguin. Even though it can cover several carriers at once, it can't cover all of them because some of them want the information to be filled specifically in their own portals. And because of that, cowork comes in handy. This is very similar to something like Gaia AI, except cowork can actually have all of your context and awareness of other instructions. So when cowork literally has an agency brain that can have all of the information about carrier appetites, what carriers are most commonly used, as well as how their portals might be different, cowork can become a coding machine. And to demonstrate this simple manner, let's say over here we have a demo carrier portal and a lot of the details are not filled in. What we can actually do is use Claude inside of Chrome. And this is very similar to cowork in the sense that it can take control of your tab. Over here, you can see that Claude has surrounded this tab inside of its orange color. And before doing this, I'm saying this for the 5th or 10th time now, make sure you are on an enterprise plan with total compliance. So let's say over here, I said, fill in whatever info you can, then report back to me on what you didn't get. And if you got everything, stop regardless and let me review. So let's say here, I went ahead and sent out this request. Claude is going to read this page. And without me intervening, Claude is already scrolling through the page and it looks like it's going to take a lot of actions here. It looks like it's already done. So it filled in all of these details. It's clicking through all of the types of insurance that are needed without me touching anything. It filled in the information. It filled in the owner name, the address, the website. It seems to have filled in every piece of information. So let's go ahead and see what it gives me at the end here. Here, it tells me everything that was filled in. And the gap for it is the form's coverage checkboxes do not include a standalone liquor liability option. And of course, this is a demo form, but the fact that Claude was able to even flag that this form is incorrect and also note 2 other points here is very impressive. You can see there that literally in several seconds, it filled in all of the information all at once, included the description here. So besides flagging anything that was missed, it also allows me as a human to be reviewing the quote form and only then send it off. And now we are moving on to the final pillar of level 4, which is going to be loss run retrieval. And loss run retrieval is basically going to pull claims history across different carrier portals, get things ready for remarketing. And this can also potentially use Claude channels. But because a real demo I just showed with the cowork quoting is a better way to explain things rather than just doing it conceptually, let's go ahead and do that. As with the last demo, let's go ahead and open up Claude inside of Chrome and let's see how well it fares with the agent portal, as well as this set of tasks over here. And more importantly, really see the logic behind its execution and how fast it's able to do it. So let's say I go ahead and I give it this information. Claude will instantly start working. So it first captures a screenshot of the page. Then it finds the sign in button. It's going to type in the credentials. And over here, it wants me to save my password. I'm just going to decline. And then inside the agent portal over here, I should go ahead and ideally view the loss runs. Here it's going to scroll down to the clients list, then gather all client information from the dashboard, and then start reviewing loss information. So over here, it's going to go inside of the client profile. Then from here, it's going to download the loss run document very conveniently onto my computer. And from here, it's pretty apparent. It's going to download the loss run information for these clients, select other forms of information, and honestly, given its sheer speed and its ability to click around on the buttons and do the logins, I'm just going to stop this demo for the sake of time. Claude is capable of performing the coding on portals, and very similarly, it's able to retrieve loss runs, pull claims history, interact with carrier portals, download PDF documents from them, and so on. And the idea in mind here with the entire delegation stage is that Claude can directly start handling very important and high leverage, time-consuming tasks, so to save tens of hours per week. And the loss run retrieval similarly automates something very tedious and very monotonous. The key idea here is that even though we're delegating all the information here, we're sticking to compliance as well as human in the loop rules, because if we've managed 80-90% of the work, which we're not sacrificing too much by letting ourselves do the 5, 10, maybe 20% at most of the work, which is reviewing what Claude did, which is sure that everything is correct, and pretty much overseeing the repetitive work rather than doing it ourselves. Now, I will say a lot of portals and just platforms in general do not like any scraping because of their terms of service. So I would take a look at that and make sure that you're not just being compliant with Claude, but also being compliant with other rules when using it. And then finally, after we have a level 4.5, which is autonomous growth. The reason it's 4.5 and not 5 is very simple. When we were previously going up the levels from level 1 to 2, 2 to 3, and 3 to 4, what was increasing was as well as the difficulty of tasks. But the key idea here with lead generation systems and autonomous growth with them is that they are not really much more complex than operation systems. As a matter of fact, they're actually less complex when it comes to compliance. But we are now at levels in terms of their difficulty or other factors. We're also ranking them by their leverage and how impactful they can be, which is pillar 1 and pillar 2. I actually broke down this combination of lead generation systems in one of my past videos, so you can check that up here for more detail. But essentially, we have the referral partner pipeline as well as the Facebook ad machine. With the referral partner pipeline, we have an IMSP framework, and this basically stands for a 5-step process where you're identifying your best referral partners. So for example, that's a personal lines P&C agent. Your best referral partners can be loan officers and real estate agents. Then you're crafting messaging that you could use to potentially build a referral partner relationship. You're sourcing them, so maybe on Google Maps for your local loan officers or real estate agents, then finding their emails, verifying their emails are valid, then sending messages in the form of automated emails, up to 1,500 emails per day. And finally, you're converting them into referral relationships that will send you several referrals at once. And of course, as I said, this uses bulk mailboxes, a 1,500 email per day setup. And pretty much in this case, you have Claude booking meetings. And the reason why Claude fits in here in a more specific way, it's because the identification, the messaging, the sourcing, the sending, as well as the conversion, those are all very repeatable steps. And as we learned, repeatable steps can be put into those things called skills, which can automate each of the processes. If you look back at my skills, you'll see here that I have find email, finding, scraping, Google Maps, processing, lead pipeline, and other skills that are relevant to referral partner generation. Just because we've done this for many agencies at this point, have AI systems that book meetings and introductions, and even $90,000 in additional premiums every single month for one agency. And the same can be said for our Facebook ad machine, which oftentimes will use Fable 5 paired with Higgsfield, which is what we were already using today. Plaza, which actually calls the Higgsfield MCP, it creates AI avatar or other creatives in minutes. So whether it's videos of people speaking, informative, and act as ads, or even image creatives, these can be created in minutes using Claude and the Higgsfield and pretty much using Meta ad system to test different creatives, remove the ones that don't work, and pretty much scale the winning ones. And so like I said, I did break down both of these systems together. Check it out up here. But the main concept here is that you get inbound leads and outbound lists. Because lead vendors are actually using pretty much this exact same strategy where they launch meta ads, mix them in with aged and shared leads, get you a few exclusive leads, and sell you overpriced lists. You pretty much get to keep the exact same strategy because it's the same method, except you own your system. And once again, we have a guarantee for this as well, if you're interested in running a system like this. But in the past, we have found that level 4.5, as you can see by its name, stage, is often going to be the last level and really the last stage we decide to automate with Claude out of all of the ones here. And the reason for that is pretty simple. If you have a broken system where you can't delegate or systematize, let alone connect or consume, it's a bigger priority to systems. Let's say your CRM, TDS tasks like data analysis or comparison, renewal tasks, CSR microtasks is a much better and more proven strategy to first handle your operations rather than immediately jump to autonomous growth. Once you're able to fix your systems, you then move on to level 4.5, which is going to be this autonomous growth. So if you're legitimately interested in a free one-on-one consultation and genuinely free audits that we actually run on every single insurance agency we work with for completely at no cost, feel free to book that consultation. There's the first link in the description, and we keep those spots limited, and we do around 3 per video because free audits of an entire agency are not always the easiest thing to offer. However long this turns out to be video, I do appreciate you for checking this out. The best way to reach me and my team, as I said, is going to be that first calendar link in the description. And if you want to access this entire diagram, as well as all the other skills, assets, and resources that I used and showed in this video, those are going to be found in the second link in the description inside of our resource hub. But otherwise, thank you for undertaking this very long video where we explored 21 different use cases for Claude inside of insurance agencies. So if you did enjoy something useful out of it, I'm absolutely happy that you did. But otherwise, have a nice rest of your day. Keep crushing it, keep selling more policies, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.